Sometimes, very rarely, the truth about the real reason for permanent war emerges very briefly before disappearing once again into the abyss of deceit and distraction that is the mainstream media. A 1980s investigation into the Pentagon's black budget, the highly secretive method by which many of the projects of the US military are funded, flashed a bright light, albeit very briefly, like a bolt of lightning into a truly dark world. Even after several months of shredding of government files, it emerged that at least $300 million of taxpayers' money could still be traced and had been misappropriated. The actual amount whose records disappeared through the shredders can't even be vaguely guessed at. It was found that an army clerk, one Ortmer Ackley, had spent the best part of 20 years misdirecting military funding into various secret and virtually untraceable Pentagon and CIA budgets. If it was just Ackley, it could be dismissed as an aberration. But he was only doing his job, and was, of course, only part of a very much larger, completely normal system for maintaining a huge secret budget. The investigative journalist Tim Weiner, who exposed the story, concluded with these remarks. In all, 8 of the Army's most powerful generals knew of, condoned, or approved the unauthorized Special Mission Fund system. Any question of disciplining the 8 generals was quashed by 2 Army lawyers, who concluded that a general is cloaked with the authority of his office. They said a general may make, bend, or break a military regulation as he pleases. As for the other slightly more indirect but nevertheless normal means of frittering away taxpayers' money, the system works something like this. The owners of huge multinationals such as engineering companies, arms companies, banks, oil companies, security services, and so on, donate huge sums of money into the election campaigns of politicians. Most of them even donate to both main parties at the same time, a bit like betting on horses in a 2-horse race, so that the donor would be able to purchase access to whatever politician wins. Then a war is manufactured in some country that can't properly defend itself, such as Serbia, Afghanistan, or Iraq, or a civil war is engineered in some resource-rich or strategically useful but otherwise impoverished third world backwater, almost on a rolling program of venues, like the civil wars in Africa, Indonesia, Southeast Asia, Central or South America. The wars themselves are obviously hugely profitable for first world arms makers, the largest of whom are also, coincidentally, represented by the permanent members of the UN's Orwellian so-called Security Council, where the maintenance of world peace is entrusted to the planet's biggest arms producers. Once the shooting ends and the dust has settled down a bit, and some suitable puppet leader installed, it's payback time. Reconstruction programs and loans are agreed, with many of the contracts being awarded to the very same companies that donated funds to election campaigns. Except for the massive sums of money involved, the loans to the newly installed puppet regimes are no different to those made by any low-life loan shark, linked to crippling interest rates that war-ravaged countries have absolutely no chance of repaying anytime soon. And the only way they can repay these crippling loans is by diverting the taxes of their citizens into the coffers of the international banking system, or by selling off their natural resources at bargain basement prices to international corporations. These natural sources of wealth are therefore used not for the benefit of the people of the war-torn country, but for the benefit of foreign banks and international corporations, the self-same foreign banks and corporations that paid the election costs of the politicians that authorized the destruction of their country in the first place. That is basically how the game is played, and for those who play it, it is no more than a game. The game of empire, which has long been known as the Great Game. The victims, of course, have another view, but their opinion is as irrelevant as that of a red grouse on the glorious 12th. The evidence for wartime profiteering is abundant, formidable, and easily found. Consider, for example, these words by General Butler in his hugely illuminating essay, War is a Racket, which was written just after the First World War. In the World War, a mere handful garnered the profits of the conflict. at least 21,000 new millionaires and billionaires were made in the United States during the World War. And remember, that was in the days when $1 million was a serious amount of money, when a good-sized family home could have been bought for about $5,000. So how was it done? General Butler cites numerous examples, the following one being far from exceptional. Take our friend the DuPonts. The average earnings of the DuPonts for the period 1910 to 1914 was $6 million a year. Now let's look at the average yearly profits during the war years, 1914 to 1918. $58 million a year profit, we find, nearly 10 times that of normal times. DuPont was already a massive corporation by the start of the war and would undoubtedly have secured numerous lucrative contracts with the US military, so much so that, as General Butler points out, it grew tenfold as a direct result of the abominable slaughter known as World War I. General Butler was also no fan of the banks. If you wonder where the money came from for all this, he offers a clue. Who provides the profits? We all pay for them, in taxation. We paid the bankers their profits when we bought Liberty bonds at $100 and sold them back at $84 or $86 to the banker. The ordinary soldier was made to buy Liberty bonds at $100 and then we bought them back. When they came back from the war and couldn't find work, at $84 and $86. And the soldiers bought about $2 billion worth of those bonds. You might ask why those fine young soldiers who couldn't have had much money buy the bonds. Butler continues. In the World War, we used propaganda to make the boys accept conscription. They were made to feel ashamed if they didn't join the army. Beautiful ideals were painted for our boys, who were sent out to die. This was the war to end all wars. This was the war to make the world safe for democracy. No one told them dollars and cents were the real reason. General Butler's testimony is not of itself exceptional. There are many similar accounts. But the real power of his contribution lies in the fact that he was not someone who could be dismissed by the mainstream media in their usual way as some kind of slavering, wide-eyed radical, because he was a veritable pillar of the establishment, a very senior army officer who was once the most highly decorated soldier in US history. The hardened doubters and committed warmongers might still sneer and splutter and respond by saying that British plutocrats would never behave like that they could not possibly have benefited from the obscenity that was the First World War. But a quick glance at the size of the British Empire before and after might shake their confidence a little. Before, approximately 13 million square miles. After, approximately 14 million square miles. 1 million square miles of new land taken over for plunder. Fast forward to the Second World War, and a lesson in the breathtaking cynicism of our trusted leaders. Whilst the US was sitting on the fence during the early stages and waiting for the right moment to time its intervention, exactly as it had done in the First World War, the future President Truman said this about the German invasion of Russia in 1941. If we see that Germany is winning, we ought to help Russia. And if Russia is winning, we ought to help Germany. And that way, let them kill as many as possible. You can't help but wonder if similar logic was used when the US eventually entered the war on the side of Britain, which had, until then, been the US's principal rival for world domination. The peace that followed World War II was potentially very bad for business, so new threats and terrors needed to be manufactured. So began the Cold War. Here's historian Gabriel Kolko echoing the views of both Hermann Göring and General Butler. Evoking national security and patriotism to forge the consensus essential to a permanent arms race, weapons makers refused to work for profits other economic sectors deemed normal. The various military services gave their contractors huge capital resources in the form of complete industrial facilities, interest-free loans, or the right to retain as exclusive patents the inventions created with government monies, to name only a few ways private interests defined and exploited the state's relationships to war preparations. Pentagon contractors' profits were very large by civilian goods standards, with 15 to 25% deemed normal, but often hidden. Between 1958 and 1966, the Minuteman missile program returned 43% annually on investment. And in one case, where 8% cost-plus profits had been negotiated, the US tax court found that in reality, 612 and 802% profits had been made over 2 years. Fast forward once more to the Iraq debacle, and here's Naomi Klein once again. "It's the best 18 months we ever had," said Carlyle's Chief Investment Officer Bill Conway, referring to the first 18 months of the war in Iraq. "We made money, and we made it fast." The war in Iraq, already clearly a disaster, translated into a record-breaking $6.6 billion to Carlyle's select investors. Or, if we cite two more revealing references from Ms. Klein's work concerning Bush's raid on Iraq, some $8.8 billion is often referred to as Iraq's missing billions, because it disappeared into US-controlled Iraqi ministries in 2004, virtually without trace. In Iraq, there was not a single government function that was considered so core that it could not be handed to a contractor, preferably one who provided the Republican Party with financial contributions or Christian foot soldiers during election campaigns. And speaking of the link between corporate sponsors of elections and government contracts, here's Arundhati Roy. Bechtel had been awarded a $680 million reconstruction contract in Iraq, according to the Center for Responsive Politics. Bechtel contributed $1.3 million towards the 1990 to 2000 Republican campaign. This is a pretty good example of why corporations pay for election campaigns. If you can pocket $680 million for a mere $1.3 million expenditure, what's not to love? No matter that 1 million people are killed and an ancient civilization blasted into dust, much of which dust is so radioactive it will never again be safe for human habitation. War is always sold to the public, who must pay for it through their taxes and their blood, as being fought for high-minded ideals, Christianity, freedom, democracy. But the hard truth is that war, all war, is only ever fought to make profits for the super rich.